Welcome. It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you for joining us. It is a great honor to have the elected president of Belarus join us today. She's going to give a few minutes of a talk, and then we're going to do a brief Q&A. Madam President, would you please come up? It is great to see you again.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, dear friends, I'm very pleased to participate in such meeting and want to thank all the organizers, especially Davos Lodge Forum and Irini Vantraki and the Belarusian National Anti-Crises Management, represented here by Pavel Berstou. I'm glad that for the third year in a row, the topic of Belarus is being discussed at the World Economic Forum in Davos. For 30 years, Belarus was a black spot on the map of Europe. It was perceived as Russian sphere of influence. But after 2020, when our peaceful revolution began, everything has changed. The world saw that Belarus is not Lukashenko, but it is brave people who aspire to a European and democratic future. Back in 2020, Belarusian people chose freedom and democracy. They said no to dictatorship. But the dictator, as it usually happens, refused to step down. He seized power with the help of terror and Russia and continues to hold out it by force. Thousands of people were detained for politically motivated reasons. Hundreds of thousands were forced to leave the country. And Belarus was turned into Putin's military launchpad for attacking Ukraine. Today, Belarus is an example of how dictators feeling impunity become a threat not only to our own people, but to the entire region. Lukashenko still hasn't been held to account for hijacking a Ryanair flight and for orchestrating the migration crisis on the border with European Union. Now, Lukashenko is blackmailing the world with nuclear weapons and he is selling Belarus to Russia piece by piece. Russian drones fly over Belarus territory, and Belarus industry supplies Russia with weapons that are killing Ukrainians. More and more, Belarus resembles one of Russian provinces and falls into complete dependence on Russia. And this is how Lukashenko pays his debt to Putin for the support he got back in 2020, with our sovereignty and at Belarusians' expense. And all this is being done against the will of Belarusian people. Today, Lukashenko is trying to restore his legitimacy again. He's conducting something that he calls elections, but in fact it is ritual of reappointing the dictator by dictator himself. No vote count, no observers, no alternative candidates. Results are clear. The only question is what number the dictator will write in the final protocol. Of course, we, Belarusian people, reject this farce and call for other countries to do the same. Lukashenko is not the president. He is the usurper who doesn't represent Belarusian people and serves only Putin's interests. And as long as Lukashenko will be in power, there will be a constant threat to the entire region. And here in Davos, there are many discussions about possible future talks on Ukraine. It is crucial that Belarusian topic will be included. We fear that Belarus can be given to Putin as consolation prize or as bargaining chip, as if Belarus belonged to the Russian sphere of influence and was part of the Russian world. But it is not. Belarusians have the right for self-determination as any other sovereign nation. Dear friends, despite the dark picture, despite all the repressions Belarusian people are going through, I really feel optimistic. because I see the resolve of Belarusian people. I see the bravery of Ukrainians, and I see the decisiveness of many foreign leaders. In the end, all the dictatorship collapse. And when it happens, we must make sure that Belarus returns to democracy and returns to Europe where it historically belongs. And first of all, we want to make sure that the dictatorship will not repeat again in our country. We already have drafted the new constitution. We will introduce a real separation of powers, real elections where every vote is counted. Since we are at the Economic Forum, it's impossible not to mention the economy, because there is no strong democracy without a strong economy. And it will be crucial, especially in the beginning, to conduct all necessary reforms, unleash private initiatives, and attract investments to Belarus. We already have a promise of 3 billion euro from the European Union for our democratic and economic transition, but more can be done for sure. We will bring all our businesses, all our talented entrepreneurs and experts back home. They will bring their capital, knowledge, experience, and contacts with them. Together, we will make Belarus a competitive and attractive market open to the world. And we have to make sure that Belarus regains its status as an IT country, famous for world-known startups and initiatives. We'll invest in new technologies such as artificial intellect. We will start the process of European integration. We will join the Council of Europe. We'll make sure that the law protects people and people's interests. We will learn from those who already passed the same transition, their best practices, in order not to repeat their mistakes. And I understand that it will be the long and difficult process of reconciliation of our nation. We will need to heal all the wounds from the 30 years of dictatorship. And we need to think and project the future and start preparing for this future already now. I know that the transition will not be fast, and it will need a lot of work. But the moment of opportunity may open at any second, at any day, and we must be ready for this. Already today, even here in Davos, we are building connections with governments, parliaments, global corporations, and this all will help us to make this transition period smoother and faster. And I truly believe that Belarus will become a contributor to peace and security, but not a threat. We make sure that our army is strong, that our borders are protected, and that foreign powers like Russia don't undermine our sovereignty anymore. You know, I really believe that Belarus, our victory, Belarus will be a success story. I do believe that changes are possible in our country, and I do believe that we will overcome all the obstacles we have today. But we need more people to walk this path together. Thank you.
Questions? Shall I? Okay.
And there is going to be a panel discussion.
Okay, good. Sorry, go.
She's going to take question. Okay. All right, so the president said a lot in that address. What is, and she talked about that the preparations have to begin now. What does that mean, and what does that look like? And as I think we were talking before we came on, that there are 500,000 Belarusians outside of Belarus. What do you do now to prepare for that day of transition?
Thanks for this question, and hello everyone. I'm Franak Viacorka. I'm Chief of Staff to Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya office. Madam President, she mentioned where we are right now, and this is a drastic picture, and where we want to be. But what is in between, this is the question mark, and this is uncertainty. And this is not only for Belarus, this is for Ukraine, this is for Europe, this is for the world right now, this uncertainty. And there are many scenarios how we can pass, from point A, where we are right now, to this point B, where we want to be. And unfortunately, we don't know, because there are so many factors, including geopolitical, military success of Ukraine, the resolve of the new American administration, the unity of the European Union, what we can do as Belarusians, for example, to strengthen connections, to put focus back on the Belarus issue, on Ukraine and the region as a whole. We can inspire people, because very often right now when we speak about supporting Ukraine, we speak only about military. We speak about weapons, which is very important to give Ukrainians everything they need to win the war. But very often, we omit investment in people as the soft power tool.
Right.
In case Belarus, it can do much more than anywhere else. And I think preparation for changes, it's about investing in people. Those young people who were on the streets, those initiatives and NGOs who are still active inside the country, to democratic institutions which work in exile. And I think having such institutions, such structures, organized and motivated society, this will be the key for this transition. And if the new window of opportunity happens, and it will happen at some point, we will have structures, we will have international coalition, we have the resolve of the people on the ground to bring from the point A to point B, Belarus, where we want to be. And of course, to project the future, to speak about the future. Because people inside Belarus, they asked very often, do you want to be part of the European Union? They say it's impossible. They don't answer yes because they don't believe it's possible. What we have to say, it's possible to have Belarus in the European Union, in the Council of Europe, as the member of the international alliances. And when people believe that something is possible, they are much more energetic and much more involved in politics. And this is important and for Belarus and for Ukraine too. Ukraine must also believe in their victory. This is why it's so important to support them now.
Yeah, so that's a nice broad picture, and within the democratic movement, our job is to, well, my job with Mr. Latushka, Svetlana's deputy, is basically to put direct pressure on the regime. And how can this be done? It's a difficult question, but there are a few simple answers. First of all, criminal responsibility. We're working very closely now with the International Criminal Court. Lithuania helped us a lot in this. And there's a commission looking into Lukashenko's crimes in Belarus and Ukraine. Because it's not a domestic issue, it's an international issue now. Also, what we can do is apply more sanctions. You need to fracture the elites, make them not trust each other, make them go against each other.
Yeah, that all makes sense. What has 30 years of dictatorship done in terms of holding Belarus back? I mean, as business progresses rapidly and technology progresses rapidly, what is the dictatorship done to? I mean, it seems to me that it's going to make progress very hard when the changes do happen, because the education system there is not keeping up with modern business. And talk about that a little bit. And can people catch up quickly? Is there a way to educate people and bridge that gap, that education gap that there's going to be?
Of course, the history is moving much faster than it was before. For Polish solidarity, it took, let's say, 20 years, right. 20 years to make changes. Right now, it takes 5 times less. So we do believe, because of technology, because of the internet, because of globalization, because travel, low cost, everything. People know what's happening right now in Poland, Lithuania, what the life can be. So there will not be problem for Belarusians, to catch up with this democratic, movements and understanding of international laws and to conduct reforms. The problem is that the time we lost it will make this change quite expensive in terms of the involvement of people's resources. And good thing that we have experiences of other countries who already passed, like Poland, like Romania, reconciliation from Portugal, maybe Spain, a little bit, Albania, we can learn from. The bad thing is that this time we lost, basically, and the people we lost, it will delay somehow this thing. But Ukraine also, they moved the real progress only in last 10 years after the Maidan revolution to 14. But right now, Ukrainians, despite the war, despite all the limitation, they demonstrate quite success in terms of the civil society building and state transparency, good governance, etc. I think internet right now is the main weapon for us, to not weapons, but tool to get to minds of the people, and we use it much more efficiently than the regime. Regime tried to create parallel reality with traditional television for many, many years, but with the appearance of Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, regime was not able to cope anymore. And 2020, it was basically also the result of technological revolution we are right now. And the regime feels old. They see all these new technologies, all these movements as the hostile to it. And the new generation doesn't understand, this hostility, and they less and less affiliate, young people themselves with the regime, and they see these technologies as like genes in Soviet time, something which connects them to the free world.
It's interesting you brought up social media. If you look at some of the other revolutions and transitions in the world where social media played a part in overthrowing governments or overturning governments, do you see that as the path here? That social media, because I think encouraging protest in the streets is a very dangerous proposition, right? That's not good for people because the military has responded in the past pretty brutally. How do you see this happening? How does this transition happen? And is social media going to play a part in that?
I think, of course, because social media is a great way to change almost the mentality of the people inside the country, which unfortunately are exposed to. You see Lukashenko 100 times a day on TV, and that's all you see. So social media is a great way to at least begin to change more of the mentality. And at the end of the day, he's not getting any younger, and there will be cracks. Cracks are already appearing in the regime, and the more people look at alternative news, of course they're going to think differently. Unfortunately, we're still in the process beginning all of this, especially after 2020, but the time will come very soon.
If I may to add, Belarusians are very adjustable in terms of using technologies. In 2020, Telegram played an important role in people's mobilization, and the regime was not able to infiltrate and control these protests. Telegram, you can create your own channel. It's like your own media without any billionaires' investments, and to broadcast your thing. And thousands of people started their own media, their own channels, their own blogs. And on this day of protests, all these bloggers, they promoted the rallies, go out, they showed the crimes of the regime. And the regime didn't understand how it happens, who is behind it. But it was made grassroots, from bottom to top. Now Telegram is almost killed, huge repressions. They managed to restrict the access to Telegram, and people are afraid even to have Telegram messaging app on their phone. But TikTok came, which in some countries, of course, no source of propaganda, but in Belarus, TikTok is quite efficient instrument to spread information because you can watch TikTok videos without leaving traces. And the regime is trying to block independent media, but people on TikTok, they just scroll in and they recommended videos from Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, from independent media, and millions of people watching independent news through TikTok just by recommendations. And I think Zoom calls, for example, in Stalin times, in Soviet time, it was difficult, to keep connection between exiled activists, diaspora, and people inside the country. Right now we have Zoom. Thanks to COVID, people learned how to install it and how to use it. And basically, Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya has every second day calls with Belarusians inside the country, with babushka, students, everyone, talking to them like she's inside the country, Belarus. So there is no this distance between exiled and domestic community as it was before. And this also makes me quite optimistic, as Madam President mentioned, because the regime is not able to build this iron curtain as it was possible 50 years ago.
Any more?
I agree.
So you have elections coming up. What does that do? Is that going to erode confidence or give him more consolidating of his power? And is he trying to make her irrelevant in the conversation?
I think he has two goals. He says that these elections, this is when legitimacy of Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya ends. Like in a fairy tale.
Right.
After midnight, so you're not longer president, I'm president again. But, we explained that she didn't take her position, she didn't take oath, she doesn't have power yet, she's president-elect, person who won elections 2020, but because Lukashenko seized power, she didn't start her mandate. And I think this is widely shared among Belarusians. We already voted 2020, we demanded free and fair elections, and now we continue fighting for that choice. And no matter what Lukashenko decides, no matter what elections he conducts, it won't change this position. This time, actually today the early voting started already. This time there will not be alternative candidates, there will not be even imitation of elections. There is Lukashenko and 4 fan club members of him who compete in praising Lukashenko better, like in Soviet time. So I don't think the international community will start to revise or recognize legitimacy of Lukashenko. It will be nonsense.
I think even calling it an election is, you can't. It's a circus. It's a military operation. He set up special units all across the country with the sole goal of repression. Russia's already said they're ready to come and help. It's not an election. It's a circus, it's a military operation, and don't think he's even fooling his entourage with this. So even saying the word election, I wouldn't.
She mentioned that, and she said in her talk that he is giving away Belarus. Expand on that a little bit, because he is making deals with Russia for loans and other, and talk about that a little bit, and how do you deal with that post his regime? Because Russia is still going to be a player in your world and a massive influence in your world. How do you deal with Russia post his presidency?
For Russia, Lukashenko is perfect. A candidate, perfect. It's a tool, it's extension to Putin's, to Kremlin. Because with the hands of Lukashenko, Russia controls Belarus. Ukraine and the war in Ukraine cost billions of euros for Putin, dozens, hundreds of billions. Lukashenko costs hundreds of millions, per year. And with the hands of Lukashenko, it's possible to suppress protests, suppress civil society. So they are instrumental to each other. And even if Lukashenko would like to go right now somewhere to Emirates, for safe heaven, Russia will not allow him, because there is no substitute, and the whole system is built for Lukashenko himself. So the collapse of Lukashenko will mean, collapse of the entire dictatorship, and for Russia it will be difficult to handle, because it's not Crimea, it's not, Donetsk or Luhansk region. It's a 9 million country with a separate identity, with its own tradition, with a strong connection to Poland and Lithuania. So we believe that if the changes start in Belarus, it will be a huge challenge for Russia. Of course, they can.
But is it naive to think that he wouldn't? He moved on Ukraine. Is it naive to think that he wouldn't move on Belarus if that government collapsed?
He already did, so Lukashenko is already there. So Belarus right now, it's like Vichy's France in the Second World War. It's
You're not worried about him putting someone else in office if
it won't work.
Lukashenko died?
It won't work, because the whole system is very personalized.
Okay.
It's like Ceausescu's system, so even those cronies around him, they will not be able, to restore the same power vertical as Lukashenko built for 30 years personally for himself. Russia, of course, will be interested in preserving control, and definitely any other group, nomenclatura, or someone who will claim the power, Russia will come and will try to establish, to control with this group. But it's not that time, where you can put your own Russian general and say, now it's your president. It won't work with Belarus. They will rather look for another Lukashenko, but so far they didn't find. If they would have such another Lukashenko, they would change long time ago, because Lukashenko is not effective, he is old, he is slow, and even himself, he understands for him it's the last election. Biologically, politically, he will not survive another 5 years, no matter what happens in the region. So I think this is also a good time for us to think what is our alternative. This is why Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya is so important for Belarus, because she's the only alternative famous to every Belarusian, which represents alternative way of development. There is Lukashenko's Belarus, Russian satellite Belarus, and there is European Belarus, represented by Tsikhanouskaya. And strengthening this alternative, it's also one of our priorities.
And for example, Madam President rightly said, a strong democracy needs a strong economy. The Belarusian economy is far from strong. It survives on cheap Russian loans. In exchange, he gives away our sovereignty. You know, the GDP is dominated by the state sector, and all these companies are neglected. You know, it's all cheap borrowed time. So obviously, in the new democratic Belarus, it all needs to be restructured and look for good Western partners.
What kind of economy do you see post his regime? I mean, do you see an economy based on tech, with entrepreneurship? What do you see the economy being based on?
So for Belarus, it was always, due to geopolitical situation between the European Union and Russia, it was always the transit hub for goods, and also heavy industry from Soviet time allowed Belarus to survive, even with Lukashenko. But it was always 35% European Union, 45% it was Russian, trade with Russia. Right now it's 80% Russia, completely depend on Russia, and Belarus doesn't use its geographical situation at all. Basically, it survives right now only because Lukashenko gains on the evasion of sanctions. All these goods which are sanctioned and cannot come to Russia directly go through Belarus, and this is how economies survive right now. So first thing we will have to do, to get rid of this complete dependence on Russian economy, diversify energy supplies. This is why it's so important right now for us. In Lithuania, for example, they are reforming right now this energy supply infrastructure, and we ask them to not destroy the Soviet time energy infrastructure, because in the critical moment we will not be able to diversify it.
Right.
Then you understand there will be energy iron curtain, but for us it will be very important in the critical moment to ensure that if Russia switches off energy supplies to Belarus, we will have alternative. And
Is 100% coming from Europe? I mean, from Russia now?
yes,
100%. Okay.
yes. Right now, completely. There were times when even Russian oil tanker, Trump previously sent in 2018, American oil tanker sent to Belarus through Baltic ports. So we had at some point American oil, but we will see what will be with new administration, how it works. But right now it's impossible to imagine. This Lukashenko is even afraid of speaking about any diversification or any independence, economical independence from Russia. But we have to speak about it, and we have to speak about support for private sector. Private sector was a driving force in 2020 revolution in Belarus. IT sector helped us to organize alternative counting of votes, etc. And IT sector developed in Belarus and became so successful only because Lukashenko didn't have a clue what it is, and he didn't impose any restrictions or limitations on it.
Okay.
Yeah, the Belarusian economy has great potential, and especially with the EU. There's no real agreement. No one wants Belarusian products because of Lukashenko, so it always goes to Russia. And Russia also uses this as a political maneuver, but having worked in the investment sector there, industries like dairy, forestry, construction, if there's an agreement with the EU, they can pay more. There's so much potential.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. So as we wrap up, let me give you guys the final word. If you guys want to make a few minutes closing statement, go for it.
I hope there will be questions from the audience, but maybe we can take one or
Sure.
two
We can do that.
if there are any.
We've informed them well.
Have there been any Belarusian movements towards green energy? I'm just curious if you keep talking about your energy dependency on other countries. Have you explored other options that could make you more financially and energetically independent?
We worked on that, and we developed, this concept, Green Belarus 2040, as I remember, just to adjust Belarus to the Green Deal, and the European standards in terms of green energy until 2040. But of course, it will be possible only without Lukashenko, because right now we cannot speak about any green solutions for Belarus with Lukashenko. We have some potential, of course, not perfect nature, for these things. But I think good thing when you destroy, this dictatorship, you can start many things from scratch, and there will be a carte blanche, we can use to establish something completely new, and also to not repeat mistakes of many other countries, and I think, it also resonates to Belarusians. I mean, the whole idea of this green country, ecology, that eco-activists in general, it was also one of the driving forces of the protests in general. This is somehow in minds of Belarusian civil society, and it will be supported on the bottom level.
I have one more question that came up from what she said. When the war in Ukraine does end, do you see Belarus benefiting from the rebuilding of Ukraine? Or is there an opportunity?
So I think it will be our obligation to help Ukraine to rebuild, and many Belarusians can work. If Belarus at this moment will become democratic, of course we will have to work both for rebuilding Belarus and Ukraine. If Belarus will not be yet democratic and free, of course many Belarusians will participate. And Ukraine, which is suffering a lot, from the labor force right now, including, I think it will benefit as well from Belarusian human force. So I think this is also the way how we can help Ukraine, because we feel responsibility for what Lukashenko has done before Ukraine. And I think it will be our obligation and our mission, both of our countries, to transform, reform, and to restore prosperity.
Are there industries there that could participate, like steel and concrete and
This trade was always steel, concrete, everything that Ukraine, produces, but also Belarus, industries were always big suppliers for Ukraine. And it was until 2022. There was a huge trade. At some point, Ukraine was even bigger importer from Belarus of goods than Russia.
It was the second biggest trading partner apart from Russia.
Yeah, that's why I asked the question, because there's a natural fit, and I think particularly if there was if you had change before that happened, both economies it would help companies in both countries dramatically. So it's an interesting question, and thank you. Any more from the?
Yes, sorry. With all due respect and sympathy for your cause, I don't want this to sound very skeptical, but I'm sort of trying to be realistic and also understand for myself how you see this. If the 2020 protests didn't bring about regime change in Belarus, what makes you think that it will collapse within the next 5 years and that Lukashenko will not stay in power for longer? And what do you think will happen or has to happen for Mrs. Tsikhanouskaya to actually be installed as president in Belarus, or for another democratic force to take over in Belarus? And on the flip side of that, do you think it would be possible for that regime change to happen in the geopolitical context that we live in? I think, Rhett, you were trying to ask that question before. Don't you think that Putin will just invade and annex, basically, Belarus if there is going to be a regime change, and if, as you say, there is no undemocratic alternative to Lukashenko?
First, no, we shouldn't think that dictators are eternal. They're not. And in case of Belarus, we are seeing how Lukashenko is losing. Politically, he works 1-2 days per week maximum. He's sick, and he doesn't offer anything to Belarusian people. With Putin, it's a different story, because in Russia there is huge imperial ambitions, and even after change of Putin, there is no guarantee there will be not another Putin, in power. But in Belarus, society is very different. 2020 launched very important processes in Belarusian society of self-identification, of forming as a nation. Also, people started to ask themselves, these geopolitical questions, where we want to be. Can we always, in this Russian sphere of influence, formerly called neutrality? And I think this mood, it didn't disappear. So war was blessing to Lukashenko. If not for the war, these 5 years could be very different for Belarus, because 2022 it completely distracted attention from Belarus. Lukashenko started to use narrative, only thanks to me there is no war in Belarus. Of course, it demobilized a lot of people. It allowed him to conduct repressions, and he blamed everyone who is against Lukashenko that they are warmongers, similar to like Georgian government was doing during the campaign. So, but this war also, will come at some point to the stop, to the end, to the break, freeze, we don't know. And this will also change, the situation with Lukashenko, because he's interested in having status quo. Any freeze will change the situation and also will raise questions to Lukashenko again, repression, situation, etc. So this is why, we hope. We try to be optimistic. We, of course, are realistic, but we hope that there will be a new moment. Like Prigozhin last year, 2 years ago, 2023. When Prigozhin March happened, we received so many calls and informations from inside Belarus. People felt, oh, it might be the moment. It didn't end as we expected, probably. But, these cases, these black swans, they can come out. And I think this year will be full of black swans. Also because of President Trump in power, also because of this Russian exhaustion of the war, effect of sanctions at some point. So we will see, and this year could be very important for Belarus too.
I'm going to jump in because this prompted another question. What is Europe's role in helping in this process? What is the EU's role in helping when this transition does happen? What do you expect from Europe?
Well, support, and that's
Because I think their support in Ukraine has been pretty weak, and so what is the expectation that they're going to support a democratic Belarus?
I don't think there's no such thing as too much support, but from our European colleagues, we hope for further pressure on the regime, like as we said earlier, international criminal investigation against the regime, sanctions, but also helping and supporting Belarusian civil society abroad. It's a big community of us, and to keep this movement going. And like Madam President meets ministers, presidents every day, every week. This is an element of support. This is recognition that we are with you. Maybe you can add more detail.
Keeping Belarus in the orbit, or in the European orbit. The biggest fear is that Belarus the status quo, Belarus as a Russian proxy will remain. And if the EU and the US will be constantly repeating that Belarus is a European nation, must be democratic, put this demand everywhere, punish Putin for undermining Belarus sovereignty, that would be important help. Not leave
Doesn't that punish the people in Belarus?
Sometimes it feels, that this isolation, which because of Lukashenko appears, but also many people found difficulties in connecting with Europe. Of course, it perceives as a punishment somehow.
I mean, because I've been in international development for a long time, and sanctions they don't work, right? It's not worked in Russia. It's not working in Iran. It's not working. It's and we persist with these kind of things routinely. Wouldn't like encouraging open market and letting the money flow in? I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I just think that there's got to be another model, because sanctions hurt the people and rarely have a result in changing a regime.
I disagree.
Okay.
I think sanctions are important. And what we have right now in Ukraine, and Russia's attack on Ukraine and on Belarus, it's the result of this free flow of money, because it allowed Putin, to make Europe dependent on Russian energy supplies. It allowed Putin to gain a lot of resources and to prepare for the war, to develop military industry complex, same as Lukashenko. It allowed them to survive for so long because of this openness. Unfortunately, the theory that the money and free market and trade, it will democratize society by themselves, it didn't work out. Sanctions, they're not changing the regime, definitely, but they raise costs of the regime's brutal actions, raise costs of war, raise cost of repression. We understand the changes we must do inside Belarus, but sanctions help, to bring, this feeling of urgency to people as well. People in countries like Belarus do not suffer from sanctions immediately, if we don't speak about visa sanctions. Visa sanctions, of course, are nonsense, they don't help. But sanctions on state enterprises, people receive so low salaries, and we see that the regime cannot even lower these salaries anymore. But those who profit, who are owning this group of oligarchs and state and apparatus, that they gain a lot.
And that was a good answer, by the way. Does it help to put pressure on the elite in Belarus and put sanctions on them and restrictions on their movement and their travel? Would that be effective?
I believe so, because there's younger people than Lukashenko. They don't want their family under criminal investigations or sanctions their whole life. Of course, it makes you question. So I think, this is why we're focusing now on more personal attacks, criminal investigations, sanction the judges, sanctions the oligarchs around who's financing Lukashenko. Because maybe his wife will say, well, I want to travel. I don't want to sit in one place all my life,
Okay. We have to wrap up. Thank you, guys. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for being here at Davos Lodge.